This 5-color Good Stuff deck is guided by a series of YouTube videos created by the professor from Tolarian Community College. In these videos, the professor identified the top 8 must-have commander cards for each color. These 40 cards are the good stuff in the 99 of this build. For the purposes of flavor, balance, and symmetry, the remaining 59 slots were filled by one 2-color spell from each of Magic's 10 2-color pairings, 10 colorless spells, and 39 lands. Once a commander was selected, this 5-color Tolarian Community College guided Good Stuff deck was born. A 5-color commander was needed for the purposes of leading this good stuff build. The general had to have powerful abilities to coincide with this deck. After perusing all available options at the time, all roads led to selecting Kenrith the Returned King as this deck's commander. Kenny was the buy-a-box promo card from Throne of Eldraine. Although Kenny is a white creature, his 5 activated abilities give him a 5-color color identity. Our general is a 5/5 legendary human noble for 4 and 1 white mana, and his 5 activated abilities are as follows. 1 red mana gives all creatures trample and haste until end of turn. 1 and 1 green mana puts a +1/+1 counter on target creature. 2 and 1 white mana has target player gain 5 life. 3 and 1 blue mana has target player draw a card. And lastly, 4 and 1 black mana puts target creature card from a graveyard onto the battlefield under its owner's control. Although these abilities can be utilized for our opponent's benefits, we plan to activate Kenny's abilities for the purposes of complementing the good stuff, inundating the 99 of this build. The professor diligently and thoroughly explained his rationale behind the selection of these must-have cards. Since these cards only will be reviewed briefly here, we encourage you to see these videos for the purposes of understanding the professor's motivation for choosing each card. Links to these videos can be found in the description below or on your screen at the beginning of each color-specific segment. Mass Destruction kicks off this portion of the video as Austere Command is the first card of the 99. We choose 2 of the following 4 modes: Destroy all artifacts, Destroy all enchantments, Destroy all creatures with mana value 3 or less, Destroy all creatures with mana value 4 or greater. Next up is Land Tax, which helps to ensure that we never miss a land drop. At the beginning of our upkeep, if an opponent controls more lands than we do, then we may search our library for up to 3 basic lands, reveal them, and put them into our hand. Sun Titan provides a somewhat limited form of graveyard recursion. Whenever this giant enters the battlefield or attacks, we may return a permanent card with mana value 3 or less from our graveyard to the battlefield. Note that lands have mana values of 0 and can be put into play from the graveyard through Sun Titan's triggered ability. Next is Enlightened Tutor. We search our library for an artifact or enchantment card, reveal it, shuffle our library, and put it on top. Mass Destruction returns with Wrath of God. It destroys all creatures and they cannot be regenerated. For spot removing a creature, Swords to Plowshares exiles target creature and has its controller gain life equal to its power. Note that this spell can target one of our creatures if our life total depended on it. Teferi's Protection has all permanents we control phase out. While they're phased out, they're treated as though they do not exist. They phase in before we untap during our next untap step. Until our next turn, our life total cannot change, and we gain protection from everything. We then exile Teferi's Protection. And the number one must-have commander card in white is Smothering Tithe. Whenever an opponent draws a card, that player may pay 2 mana. If they do not, then we create a treasure token. More annoyingly for our opponents is that they get to hear us say, "Are you going to pay 2 for that?" each time they draw a card. We begin the blue segment of this video with Mystical Tutor. We search our library for an instant or sorcery card, reveal it, shuffle our library, and put it on top. Next up is Counterspell. For 2 blue mana, we counter target spell. We continue with some creature removal. Although the professor listed both Pongify and Rapid Hybridization as options in this slot, for the purposes of this deck, we selected Rapid Hybridization due to availability. Either spell is acceptable, as both spells destroy creatures at instant speed for just 1 blue mana. Its controller either creates a 3/3 green ape or a 3/3 green frog lizard creature token. Up next is some selective card advantage. Dig Through Time allows us to look at the top 7 cards of our library. We put 2 of them into our hand and the rest on the bottom of our library in any order. We do not have to pay this spell's 6 and 2 blue mana cost. Through its Delve mechanic, each card we exile from our graveyard while casting this spell pays for 1 generic mana, which means we could cast this instant for as little as 2 blue mana. Narset, Parter of Veils, follows. She comes into play with 5 loyalty counters and has a static ability that prevents each opponent from drawing more than 1 card each turn. We can remove 2 loyalty counters from Narset to look at the top 4 cards of our library. We may reveal a non-creature, non-land card from among them and put it into our hand. We put the rest of these cards on the bottom of our library in a random order. Search for Azcanta enters the battlefield as an enchantment, and at the beginning of our upkeep, we look at the top card of our library. We may put that card into our graveyard. Then, if we have 7 or more cards in our graveyard, we transform Search for Azcanta into Azcanta, the Sunken Ruin. We can tap this land to add a blue mana, or we can pay 2 and a blue mana and tap it to mimic the aforementioned -2 Planeswalker ability of Narset, except the cards are put on the bottom of our library in any order rather than randomly. This leads us to Cyclonic Rift. When we pay its overload cost, this instant returns each non-land permanent we don't control to its owner's hand. And the number one must-have commander card in blue is Rhystic Study. This enchantment taxes each opponent's spell by 1 mana, and failure to pay it results in us drawing a card. A much worse outcome for our opponents is hearing the question, "Are you going to pay 1 for that?" over and over and over again. We begin this portion of the video with a black calling card, Graveyard Recursion. Animate Dead is an aura that enchants a creature card in a graveyard. When it comes into play, we return the creature card from a graveyard to our side of the battlefield and attach Animate Dead to it. It gives enchanted creature -1/-0, and when Animate Dead leaves play, the creature is sacrificed. Exchanging life for resources is another popular black theme, as showcased by Phyrexian Arena. At the beginning of our upkeep, we draw a card and we lose 1 life. Continuing the life for resources trend is Toxic Deluge. As an additional cost to cast the spell, we pay X life. Each creature gets -X/-X until end of turn. Dictative Erebus provides another form of creature removal. Whenever a creature we control dies, each opponent sacrifices a creature. Note that this enchantment has flash, which means we can cast it at any time we could cast an instant. For targeted creature removal, Shriekmaw destroys target non-black, non-artifact creature when it enters the battlefield. We can cast it for 4 and 1 black mana, or we can pay its evoke cost of 1 and 1 black mana instead. If we do, then we sacrifice it when it enters the battlefield. This 3/2 elemental has fear, which means it can only be blocked by black and or artifact creatures. For more targeted removal, there is Hero's Downfall, which destroys target creature or planeswalker at instant speed. Next up is Exquisite Blood. Whenever an opponent loses life, we gain that much life. This enchantment can create a chasm-like discrepancy in life totals between us and our opponents. And the #1 must-have commander card in black is Demonic Tutor. For 1/1 black mana, this sorcery lets us search our library for any card and put it into our hand. This is hands down the best tutor in the game. The first card in this segment is Curse of Opulence. It is an aura curse that enchants a player. Whenever an enchanted player is attacked, the player that is attacking the enchanted player creates a gold token. A gold token can be sacrificed for 1 mana of any color. Note that gold tokens differ from treasure tokens, as golds do not need to tap in order to be sacrificed. Next is Outpost Siege. When it enters the battlefield, we choose Khans or Dragons. If we choose Khans, then at the beginning of our upkeep, we exile the top card of our library. Until end of turn, we may play that card. Note that we can play land cards exiled this way, as long as we have an available land drop to do so. If we choose Dragons, then whenever a creature we control leaves the battlefield, Outpost Siege deals 1 damage to any target. For some mass creature removal, Blasphemous Act deals 13 damage to each creature. This sorcery's mana cost is reduced by 1 mana for each creature on the battlefield, which means that we can cast this spell for as little as 1 red mana. Speaking of 1 red mana, Gamble has us search our library for a card, put that card into our hand, and then discard a card at random. Dockside Extortionist has the potential for mass mana acceleration. When it enters the battlefield, we create X treasure tokens, where X is equal to the number of artifacts and enchantments our opponents control. Speaking of artifacts our opponents control, Hellkite Tyrant gains control of all artifacts defending player controls if it deals combat damage to that player. As a 6/5 with flying and trample, we are very likely to trigger this dragon's artifact stealing ability. As an alternate win condition, at the beginning of our upkeep, if we control 20 or more artifacts, we win the game. For more mass destruction, if we pay Vandal Blast's overload cost, then we destroy each artifact we don't control. And the #1 must-have commander card in red is Chaos Warp. The owner of target permanent shuffles it into their library, then reveals the top card of their library. If it's a permanent card, then they put it onto the battlefield. Note that Chaos Warp can target one of our permanents as well. The green portion of this video picks up right where red left off. Spot removing permanents. Beast Within destroys target permanent, and its controller creates a 3/3 green beast creature token. For graveyard recursion, Eternal Witness returns target card from our graveyard to our hand when it enters the battlefield. This slot is dedicated to protection in the form of Asceticism. This enchantment gives creatures we control hexproof. We also can pay 1 and a green mana to regenerate target creature. For more protection, Heroic Intervention is an instant that gives permanents we control hexproof and indestructible until end of turn. Seedborn Muse is up next, and may be the most powerful card in the deck when working in conjunction with our general. We untap all permanents we control at the beginning of each player's untap step. With our entire mana base available during each player's turn, we can activate Kenny's abilities as many times as we want. Both Kodama's Reach and Cultivate are duplicate cards, but they get their own slots in this must-have list. We search our library for up to 2 basic lands, reveal those cards, put one onto the battlefield tapped, and the other into our hand. And the #1 must-have commander card in green is Courser of Crewfix. This enchantment creature has us play with the top card of our library revealed. We may play lands from the top of our library, and whenever a land enters the battlefield under our control, we gain 1 life. As noted earlier in this video, the 40 must-have commander cards, as per the professor, act as the good stuff in this build. For balance, 10 slots of this deck are dedicated to 10 2-color spells, 1 from each of Magic's color pairs. The selection process for these cards was derived by answering the following question. What 2-color card from each 2-color pair gives me the best opportunity to win? With that in mind, here are the 10 2-color spells in this deck. With its evasiveness, card-drawing synergies, and built-in hexproof enablement, Dream Trawler is an absolute nuisance on the battlefield. It is a 3/5 with flying and lifelink, and whenever we draw a card, it gets +1/+0 until end of turn. Whenever it attacks, we draw a card. Without any additional peripheral card-drawing effects, it attacks as a 5/5 each turn. In this scenario, and without any blockers, we are on the good side of a 10-point life swing in life totals. We also can discard a card to give Dream Trawler hexproof until end of turn, and then we tap it. This discard outlet should not be overlooked, particularly because Kenny can return creature cards from our graveyard to the battlefield for just 4 and 1 black mana, which is a much more economical cost than most of the creatures in this section of the video. We can stifle an opponent's ability to cast spells for a turn, as well as utilize the top of their library as an extension of our hand with Xanathar, Guild Kingpin. At the beginning of our upkeep, we choose target opponent. Until end of turn, that player cannot cast spells. We may look at the top card of that player's library at any time. We may play the top card of their library, and we may spend mana as though it were mana of any color to cast spells this way. Note that we may play the top card of their library, which means we can play lands from the top of their library as long as we have available land drops to do so. Although we can give this beholder haste and trample through Kenny, it otherwise has no evasion, but its placement into this build is based upon its card advantage ability rather than its attributes in combat. Remember, there's more than one way to win a game of Magic. Speaking of there being more than one way to win a game of Magic, whenever an opponent casts a spell, Kenrith the Merciless deals damage equal to that spell's mana value to any target. Kenrith can control the battlefield and our opponent's decision-making, as his direct damage-dealing ability can alter our opponent's game plans, particularly if their life totals have dwindled precipitously throughout the game. Similar to Xanathar, Kenrith has no evasion stapled on to its 5/4 body, but his presence on the battlefield resonates with all of our opponents. Returning to the realm of combat, Samut, Voice of Dissent, is a 3/4 with Flash, Double Strike, Vigilance, and Haste for 3, a red, and a green mana. That's 4 keyword abilities on the body of a 3/4 for a mana value of just 5. Oh, but we're not done yet. Samut gives other creatures we control haste, and we can pay a white mana and tap Samut to untap another target creature. Although our general has the ability to provide mass haste enablement, a little redundancy in this area is not unwelcomed. Samut's Flash can surprise an opponent, and the presence of Double Strike makes her even more threatening, even more so if she is the recipient of any +1/+1 counters from Kenny. Also, Samut's Vigilance allows her to defend as well as attack, and her mass haste enablement allows other creatures to attack or use their activated abilities the turn they come into play. Samut is a force to be reckoned with on the battlefield. Here we have another evasive beatdown creature with Dragonlord Dromaka. This dragon is a 5/7 flyer with lifelink, and it cannot be countered. There are few threats in the air that can take down Dromaka, and even if there's chump blocking afoot, we gain life each and every time that transpires. If there are no blockers, then similar to Dream Trawler, we are on the good side of a 10-point swing in life totals. Also, our opponents cannot cast spells during our turn. This blanket protection allows us to play our entire turn without fear of counter magic or removal spells. We can cast a game-ending spell, amass a game-winning hasty army, or combo off and win the game. And, in each scenario, our opponents are left gripping their hands of interactive spells because Dromaka says, no, no, no. The first and only non-creature spell in this portion of the video is Debt to the Deathless. Each opponent loses twice X life, and we gain life equal to the life lost this way. The aforementioned ability of Dragonlord Dromaka shines through here. With no threat of counter magic, we can cast this sorcery confidently knowing that, at a minimum, a chasm-like discrepancy in life totals between us and our opponents is the outcome. The best case scenario, of course, is that we win the game. We have showcased some evasive combat threats so far, but we have not featured any swarming threats until now. Enter the Locust God. Whenever we draw a card, we create a 1/1 blue and red insect creature token with flying and haste. This god also has a built-in looting ability for 2 a blue and a red mana, which would create one of the aforementioned insects as a result. When the Locust God dies, we return it to our hand at the beginning of the next end step. This ability makes the Locust God a difficult creature with which to interact. We do not always have to send a biggin or 2 into combat. We can send a swarm of bugs instead, all thanks to the Locust God. Beledros Witherbloom is much more than another evasive creature. This dragon is a 4/4 with flying, and at the beginning of each upkeep, we create a 1/1 black and green pest creature token with, when this creature dies, we gain 1 life. Note that Beledros's creature token producing ability triggers at the beginning of each upkeep and not just ours. We also may pay 10 life, and if we do, then we untap all lands we control. This is an ability we can activate only once per turn. The pests created by Beledros primarily serve the functions of chump blocking and gaining life. Its untap all lands we control ability, however, synergizes amazingly with Kenny. With a slew of lands on our side of the battlefield, Beledros and Kenny can make beautiful music together, turn after turn after turn. As impactful creatures go, few fit this description better than Gisela, Blade of Gold Knight. She is a 5/5 with flying and first strike. If a source would deal damage to an opponent or a permanent an opponent controls, that source deals double that damage to that player or permanent instead. Note that this ability triggers when our opponents deal damage to other opponents as well. If opponent number 1 deals damage to opponent number 2, or a permanent controlled by opponent number 2, that damage is doubled. If a source would deal damage to us or a permanent we control, Gisela prevents half of that damage, rounded up. With Gisela, we get a combat-ready heavy hitter, we double all damage dealt to our opponents and their permanents, and we can more than halve all damage dealt to us and our permanents. Gisela is a game ender. The 10th and final slot here has had the most turnover, as a true powerhouse Simic option had not been realized until Coma Cosmos Serpent made its debut in Kaldheim. Coma is a 6/6 and cannot be countered. At the beginning of each upkeep, we create a 3/3 blue serpent creature token named Coma's Coil. We can sacrifice another serpent we control to choose one of the following 2 options. Either we tap target permanent, and its activated abilities cannot be activated this turn, or Coma gains indestructible until end of turn. Note that Coma's creature token producing ability triggers at the beginning of each upkeep and not just ours. In a couple rounds of turns, Coma and its serpent creature tokens can completely take over and control the game. The 40 must-have commander cards and the 10 2-color spells bring our total number of cards up to 50. Closing out the non-land cards in this deck are our 10 colorless spells. For continued flavor, balance, and symmetry, it was decided that these 10 cards would be split into 2 sections of 5 cards each, with one section focused on strengthening and enhancing the deck, while the other section focused on ramping mana. We begin with our deck synergies. Our first colorless spell is Skull Clamp. It gives equipped creature +1/-1, and whenever it dies, we draw 2 cards. As showcased, we have the potential to create swaths of 1/1 sacrificial creature tokens. Paying 1 mana and having a 1/1 creature token die in order to draw 2 cards is a great return on our investment. Even if Skull Clamp is equipped to a creature with a toughness greater than 1, we can sacrifice that creature to Altar of Dementia and still draw 2 cards. The Altar allows us to sacrifice a creature to have target player mill cards equal to the sacrificed creature's power. Remember, Kenny has a recursive ability to bring creatures back to the battlefield from the graveyard for 4 and 1 black mana. Absent any triggered shuffle effects from cards in our opponent's libraries, Altar of Dementia is a win condition in this deck. Although it's not quite a win condition, the Dalkin Orrery can create many headaches for our opponents. This artifact allows us to cast our spells as though they had flash. Note that we can cast Kenny from the command zone as though he had flash as well. With our general, the Dalkin Orrery, and all of our mana sources available to us, our gameplay options become so numerous that our opponents may need to think 2 or 3 times about each and every move they make. We have powerful creatures that are major threats once they reach the battlefield, including our general. Although we have some blanketed protection already in the 99, including Lightning Greaves provides another layer of security. It gives equipped creature haste and shroud. Attaching this equipment to any of the aforementioned 2-color creatures prevents our opponents from targeting them with anything. Note that the Greaves also prevents us from targeting the creature as well. So Kenny cannot put any +1/+1 counters on a creature equipped by Lightning Greaves. The last colorless spell in this section is Wormcoil Engine. It is a 6/6 Phyrexian worm with Death Touch and Lifelink. When it dies, we create 2 3/3 colorless Phyrexian worm artifact creature tokens. One of them has Death Touch, and the other has Lifelink. We basically have a 6/6 beater that creates 2 3/3s after it dies. This is another great recursive target for Kenny, particularly due to the creature token production upon its death. The usual suspects dominate this section of the video, as Mana Crypt, Soul Ring, Arcane Signet, and Felwar Stone are as close to auto-includes as auto-includes get. Both Mana Crypt and Soul Ring tapped for 2 colorless mana. Arcane Signet taps for 1 mana of any color in this build, while Felwar Stone taps to add 1 mana of any color that a land an opponent controls could produce. We are playing 5 colors, so in some way, shape, or form, we should get some mana fixing through this artifact. Playing a game of Commander where each opponent has a colorless deck is as rare as winter roses, which makes this artifact a worthy inclusion in the 99 here. The last spell in this deck tech video is Solemn Simulacrum. When it comes into play, we may search our library for a basic land card and put it onto the battlefield tapped. When it dies, we draw a card. This melancholic automaton provides mana ramp and card draw with an easy-to-cast mana cost of 4 generic mana. The land base of this deck has to be diverse to support 5 colors. It also has to acknowledge the need to have a sufficient number of basic lands for the various ramp spells in the 99. If land tax or Solemn Simulacrum trigger without any basic lands in our library, then it hurts. If Kodama's Reach and or Cultivate are in our hand without any basic lands in our library, then it hurts even more. The land base also must remain singleton for the purposes of optimizing one of the deck's soon-to-be showcased win conditions. With these guidelines in mind, we begin the land portion of this deck tech with 5 basic lands and 5 basic snow-covered lands, 1 of each color. Installing 10 basic lands with different names checks the boxes of ensuring a sufficient number of basic lands for ramp spells, while also maintaining a singleton land base. The next 10 lands in this build are the Shock Lands. Each of these lands enter the battlefield tapped unless we pay 2 life, and they tap to add 1 of 2 different colors of mana to our mana pool. Note that these lands have 2 different land types, which allows us to utilize another cycle of lands for fixing our mana. This ensures that we can cast our spells and activate our abilities each and every turn. Which brings us to the next 10 lands in this build, the Fetch lands. We can tap, pay 1 life, and sacrifice these lands to search our library for a land with one of 2 different land types and put it onto the battlefield. These lands can fetch into play our aforementioned basic lands or shock lands. Through this land fetching dynamic, we have a minimum of 2 different land cards entering the battlefield during the same turn. Which brings us to the earlier alluded to land win condition and the reason for sculpting a singleton land base, Field of the Dead. Whenever Field of the Dead or another land enters the battlefield under our control, if we control 7 or more lands with different names, then we create a 2/2 black zombie creature token. We are rewarded for engaging in a basic fundamental aspect of playing Magic the Gathering, playing lands. Through our fetch land dynamic and various graveyard recursion effects, we can amass hordes of zombie creature tokens for the purposes of controlling the battlefield and overwhelming our opponents in combat. There are other lands in this deck that fix our mana as well. Command Tower taps to add 1 mana of any color in this build. Reflecting Pool should do the same and can be considered Command Tower version 2.0. Mana Confluence follows suit, but it costs 1 life each time we tap it for mana. Forbidden Orchard also adds 1 mana of any color, but whenever we tap it for mana, target opponent creates a 1/1 colorless spirit creature token. Luckily for us, these spirit creature tokens do not fly. How does a spirit not fly? Our last color-fixing land is Exotic Orchard. It taps to add 1 mana of any color that a land an opponent controls could produce. As 5-color decks continue to grow in popularity and feasibility, Exotic Orchard moves closer and closer to becoming a temporary version of Command Tower. Moving away from lands that provide colored mana, we have Temple of the False God. It taps to add 2 colorless mana, but it can only be activated if we control at least 5 lands. We have some biggins in this deck, and Temple of the False God can help us cast them ahead of curve. As long as we can tap it for mana, of course. For some utility benefits, we have Reliquary Tower. With various ways of getting extra cards into our hand, keeping those cards in excess of 7 is important. Cards in hand equals problems for opponents. Reliquary Tower serves this function well by giving us no maximum hand size. Most likely, Kenny will be a lightning rod for attention, especially if we fail to share his abilities with our opponents. This lack of philanthropy may result in heightened use of spot removal on our general. We can mitigate Kenny's accrued commander tax for a turn by tapping and sacrificing Command Beacon and putting Kenny into our hand from the command zone. Hopefully, we won't sacrifice any of the relationships with the members of our playgroup by doing so. Aside from direct damage, combat damage, commander damage, a well-timed casting of Debt to the Deathless, or triggering Hellkite Tyrant's endgame ability at the beginning of our upkeep, we also have the potential to create an instant speed and repeatable game-winning engine with Altar of Dementia. For this engine, we need Altar of Dementia and Kenny on our side of the battlefield, and Dockside Extortionist either on the battlefield or already in our graveyard. We begin by recurring Dockside Extortionist from our graveyard to the battlefield through Kenny's ability. If it's not there already, then we sacrifice it to the altar. When Dockside enters the battlefield, we create a treasure token for each artifact and enchantment controlled by our opponents. We must be certain that our opponents have more than 5 artifacts and enchantments under their control. We then sacrifice Dockside to the altar and mill an opponent for 1 card. Then we use 5 of the recently created treasure tokens to activate Kenny's ability and return Dockside from our graveyard to the battlefield, creating more treasures. We repeat this process until we have milled each opponent's library. If any opponents have any cards that trigger any shuffle this card into your library, or shuffle your graveyard into your library replacement effects, then we amend our plans. We continue revving our mill engine until we have created oodles of treasure tokens. Then we have those opponents draw every card in their libraries by activating Kenny's card draw ability over and over and over again. Remember, when a player draws a card from an empty library, they lose the game. Hopefully, we will not lose any members of our playgroup as a result. This Kenrith the Returned King build has been added to the Burgeoning Commander Catalog, and this video also becomes the starting point of a Kenrith the Returned King video primer series. These playlist series can be accessed in the description below, on our YouTube page, or at the end of this video. The Burgeoning Commander Catalog is my personal collection of EDH decks. A video primer series showcases the continued evolution of a deck through future appearances on the Up and Up series, during which we update and upgrade decks featured on this channel. The full card list for this build can be found in the description, and be sure to share your thoughts about this Kenrith the Returned King deck in the comment section below. This is MTG Burgeoning, your channel for all things Magic.